All right, so is there a God is what we were talking about last week. And of course, yes, there is. And we're going to start with a song because, again, I think songs kind of put you in the right mood. And this is Phil Wickham's version of Amazing Grace. It's always a good start. So I wanted to just kind of give us an update on our progress on the class. So we did truth and we're finishing up, is there a God? So we're kind of building toward our evidence for God, this whole series. And then next week we will talk, I think we're going to actually skip and do the problem of evil next week. And then we'll go back and do the evidence for why we can actually trust and believe what we see in the Bible. And there's a lot of great evidence. But the problem of evil is the one that everybody always uses against Christianity. That's the atheist hammer is what I like to call it. And we will talk through their arguments and then show why their arguments really actually point toward God instead of away from God. It's not to downplay bad things that happen in this world, because bad things happen. But the Bible gives us some guidance on how to address those things. And it definitely will be interesting conversation, because that is one that most people struggle with the most. And I'm sure, Eric, you've seen the worst of the worst, and how you deal with those things really do impact how we can trust that God really does exist and that He has a plan. So it's just kind of give you an overview, because I know Chris asked me last week, it's like, where are we in our sequence? And I'll try to do that. We're going to be talking mostly about science today, which I'll get excited about. But when we get to the end, we'll have a couple of sessions where we're going to just talk about science in the Bible. And, sorry, no, that's okay. It happens to me all the time. All right. So we're going to be talking mostly about naturalism versus God. And we talked about the cumulative case a little bit last week, and that most of the evidence leans toward God. But the naturalist thinks that everything happens if you have enough time. So I think I brought this out a couple weeks ago. This is a paperweight. I don't know if you can see that Judy and I's faces are etched into this glass. It was given to us as a wedding gift. It has our anniversary on it. So let me ask you a question. How long do you think it would take that to become that? That's really what the naturalist is saying. If you wait long enough, things will become more ordered, more designed. What's the difference between these two items? They're both highly designed, right? They're both made out of glass. What's the difference? There's a higher level of design in the paperweight, right? Now, I could break this on the floor and take a blowtorch to it. Would that help me get toward that? No. Probably not. And, the naturalist approach is really more like this. Let's see if I can get my example out without setting the house on fire. So, the naturalist says if you just heat sand, you're going to have that paperweight. I think I can do this, actually. Let's see if I can do it. So fire. I'm not going to really do it. But they think lightning or whatever, and I can make that look like that. Highly designed. Is that practical? No. And in fact, the naturalist view is even more complicated. They say, despite all the junk that you might have in creation, somehow I can take this very disorganized mess, let me pick it up, and somehow, just with time, it's going to become ordered. And I think we all know from our experience that time usually doesn't help things to get more ordered. Usually it gets less ordered. And there's probably some moisture in here, and if I was to set this out in the sun for a few days and come back, it probably wouldn't smell very good. But that's what we're up against when we're looking at the naturalist views of things, is they think in the case of life that the universe moved from chaos to order, even though what we observe here on Earth is always the opposite of that. So it's something to keep in mind that their theories, they have that roadblock in their mind. They have this concept that everything in the origins is opposite to what we observe. Go ahead, Eric.
Are you talking about Scientology in a sense?
Well, Scientology is actually another religion, but that would be, which Christian scientists might be the ones that kind of think this way, but a naturalist is the one that thinks everything comes from essentially nothing, right? Or we started with very simple and we became really complex. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the different levels of creation and see how we can see design in those different levels. So we're going to be looking at our puzzle, and we'll be focusing here on these two puzzle pieces. Proof for God, but we're going to actually prove God through science. So let me just kind of recap where we were last week. The first thing, 2 books, because I try to recommend books every week. William Lane Craig's Cosmological Argument. If you're looking for better information than what I gave you on the cosmological argument, William Lane Craig's book is pretty good. It's a whole book. I gave you 5 minutes. He gives you a whole book. He actually teaches a class at Biola just on this subject. Another one would be if the ontological argument, which was the argument of being, which was the one that hurt your head because it's all about philosophy. Norman Geisler wrote a whole book on that theory, and he puts it in language that's a little easier to understand than maybe what I did. So if you're interested in either one of those arguments, these would be resources to get a little more depth on those 2 topics. Teleological, now that's one we're going to talk about today, which is the one of design. So, is there a God? And you guys are completely quiet.
Yes.
Yes. But the question is why? Why do we think there's a God? And that's the reason we're having these sessions to talk about. There's lots of evidence for God. And in fact, Christianity is not a blind faith. We have a faith that's actually supported by the evidence. It's supported by science, it's supported by logic, it's supported by reason, it's supported by everything. Anybody that says things point away from God is not being, they're being ingenuous about the way they're describing certain aspects of their arguments. And I believe in the cumulative case approach pretty much to everything. I'm a scientist, that's what we do. It's like the teeter-totter I have down here. When you decided to come over here, you had to weigh which direction you were going to go. Well, that's the cumulative case approach. You think, how long it's going to take me, how far it's going to take me, what the traffic might be. Maybe there's something you like to look at when you're driving. Well, those are all things that you use as evidence to choose your path. I mean, everything we do in life effectively follows the cumulative case approach. And the question I have for Christians is, why don't we use this in our defense of Christianity? Because it's very strong. The evidence against Jesus is much weaker than the evidence for Jesus. Instead of dwelling on trying to disprove every little thing, why don't you show the volume of proof for what we believe? Sometimes we get too pessimistic and we get too focused on trying to counter somebody's false claims that you can get lost in the weeds. What I would suggest is to stick with the claims that are really strong, and then once we've established the breadth of our evidence, then we can talk about how we would address their biggest concerns. And we talked a little bit about it last week about how much evidence we have. And this is not a comprehensive list by any stretch of the imagination. We talked about the beginnings argument, which is the cosmological argument. That's the beginning of everything. Usually comes back to Big Bang. We'll talk about the design argument today, the moral argument, how do we choose right and wrong, what they call the being argument, which is ontological. It means our essence of existence. It's a philosophical argument, always points toward God. We talked about what the standard is for truth. And in part of that session, we talked about also what the standard is for beauty, aesthetics. Aesthetics are something that just kind of come natural to us. And the question is, where does that come from? The naturalist perspective doesn't work because there's no basis for things being pretty or things tasting good. I mean, none of those concepts make sense in a naturalist perspective. That has to be something that is outside of us where we get those concepts. And those are things that we have already kind of addressed. And let me just go through it kind of quickly, just kind of recap, because I know some of you weren't here last week. So when we're talking about the cosmological argument, we're talking about the big one, right? That where everything came from. And there's basically 5 main arguments, and we went through them last week. The Big Bang, the balanced universe, the cyclic, it's an expanding, contracting universe, the redefined time model, which is a little weird, and then the multiverse. And we went through why those failed when you looked at the evidence last week. So if you want more on that, we can talk about it again. But it got us to the point where most physicists, most scientists agree that there had to have been a beginning. And that always gets us to the Big Bang, is what they call it. And as Christians, we always have the comeback, is if there is a Big Bang, then there's got to be a Big Bang-er, right? You can't have everything come from nothing unless there is something very powerful that has made that take place. So that's the cosmological argument in a 30-second nutshell. The other one was the right and wrong, and this is the moral argument. There has to be a basis for our standard for right and wrong. It's not intuitive that it would be, well, human flourishing is the one that's often used as the argument, that right and wrong is really determined what's best for the society. But it's actually not true. If you look at world governments in history, people try to do human flourishing their way. Hitler was trying to do human flourishing when he was trying to eliminate all the weak. Stalin tried to do the same thing. You can go through all the human efforts to make human flourishing work, and it doesn't look very pretty. The standard has to be outside of humans, because who gets to make the choice on what human flourishing looks like? Our selfish nature always means it's going to look like me or what I want. It's never going to look like what God wants, which is, so there has to be a standard. So that's just kind of quickly going through what we did last week. And if you have any questions about that, we can talk about it in more detail. But I wanted to spend time just on the design argument. Teleo means design, so teleological just means the study of design. And I'm going to use, I don't know how, I introduced you to J. Warner Wallace a few weeks ago. He's one of the Christian apologists that's written a bunch of books. He used to be a cold case detective in Los Angeles. So he kind of takes that approach to his defense of Christianity. And he has this idea that you need to look at every level of creation. And I kind of took that and expanded on it a little bit. So our target is our design argument. And the outer level is going to be the universe level. We're going to look at everything on the grand level. Then we'll come down to the galactic level, just looking at our galaxy, the Milky Way. Then we'll look at our regional level, which is our solar system. And then our local level, which is the planet Earth. Then we'll get to a personal level, which is life itself. And then we'll go to subatomics, and I'll start smiling because that's my scientific research, right? So I get a chance to share some of my words that are not in the normal vernacular. But we'll look at each one of these, and what you'll see is that God's design is very evident at every level of creation. And the question is, if it's not God, then what is it? I mean, how can you see complexity in design and think it just came from nothing? It's like the paperweight coming from a pile of sand. If I just waited 1 billion years, it would turn into this highly designed paperweight. And trust me, you are way more complicated than that paperweight is. And even our planet, we kind of overlook the complexity of the place we live. And we'll go through each one of those layers. Do you have any questions?
No, but just like that little plate of sand and rocks, the rocks had to come from somewhere. They didn't just appear, and neither did the sand.
Yep.
But it's hard to think about putting that in a human form comes out with all the complexities that we have coming out of that.
Yeah, that's the origin of life research in a nutshell. You have this pool, or right now they're saying it's like basalt glass, and that somehow the proteins got formed on that because it got hit by lightning. And yeah, it's an interesting story. It takes a lot of faith to believe those stories. But we'll just look at it, and like I said, look at the evidence and see if you can see things that you can use. And so we'll look at the galaxy first. And too bad Hank's not here. I have pictures for him. So this is a picture from the James Webb telescope. And this is one of the deepest peers into the universe so far that they've published. In fact, this is in a part of the sky where they thought there was nothing. And they zoomed into, there's places in the sky that looks like it's void of stars. And as they zoomed in, they found more galaxies than you can count. Anything that doesn't have the star pattern on it is a galaxy. So that's like trillions of stars in a place where they didn't think there was anything. The astrophysicists are a little confused about what they see, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I'm going to just show you a quick video. This is a zoom in. And these are on space.com. You can go see these. This is U.S. government's website. Yeah, they call it a cartwheel galaxy. But I want you to notice how crisp the lights are. Have you ever stood at like 100 meters and shown a flashlight? Does it look small or big relative to its actual size? Light tends to diffuse, right? Everything you see in this image is not what the scientists expected to see. As you zoom in further and further, the galaxies should get blurrier and blurrier. And you'll see, I'll show you a couple more of these as we go on. It's, yeah, color. Now, these are not like pure visual images. These are in a spectrum that we don't see. So what they do is they assign a wavelength of color. So the colors are not what we would see with our naked eye, but what color tells you is direction and speed mostly. So if it's blue, it's kind of coming toward you. If it's red, it's moving away from you.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, Or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would, again, be life-prohibiting. Or, another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. What is the best explanation for this astounding phenomenon? There are 3 live options. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Which of these options is the most plausible? According to this alternative, the universe must be life-permitting. The precise values of these constants and quantities could not be otherwise. But is this plausible? Is a life-prohibiting universe impossible? Far from it. It's not only possible, it's far more likely than a life-permitting universe. The constants and quantities are not determined by the laws of nature. There's no reason or evidence suggests that fine-tuning is necessary. How about chance? Did we just get really, 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 really lucky? No. The probabilities involved are so ridiculously remote as to put the fine-tuning well beyond the reach of chance. So, in an effort to keep this option alive, some have gone beyond empirical science and opted for a more speculative approach, known as the multiverse. They imagine a universe generator that cranks out such a vast number of universes that, odds are, life-permitting universes will eventually pop out. However, there's no scientific evidence for the existence of this multiverse. It cannot be detected, observed, measured, or proved. And the universe generator itself would require an enormous amount of fine-tuning. Furthermore, small patches of order are far more probable than big ones. So the most probable, observable universe would be a small one, inhabited by a single, simple observer. But what we actually observe is the very thing that we should least expect: a vast, spectacularly complex, highly ordered universe, inhabited by billions of other observers. So even if the multiverse existed, which is a moot point, it wouldn't do anything to explain the fine-tuning. Given the implausibility of physical necessity or chance, the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life may very well be it was designed that way. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a superintellect monkeyed with physics, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge.
So that's reasonable faith. That's William Lane Craig's ministry. And all the people he's quoting are all atheists. So those people that were quoting that must be something behind the design, they all don't believe in God, believe it or not. So let's just take a closer look at these fine-tuned arguments. And